Coffee, Cows, and Crops is produced by the Peace Country Beef and Forage Association and hosted by Extension Coordinator Johanna Murray. On this podcast, we discuss management practices and research results with scientists, ranchers, researchers, and farmers. We strive to share innovative information and farming practices supported by sound science and practical wisdom. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get learning. Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in to Coffee, Cows, and Crops. Today I'm chatting with Jay Byer, a soil conservation analyst from Gateway Research Organization in Westlock. And today we're going to chat a bit about a project Jay has been working on that looks at managing marginal land adaptively. But before we get into all the fun stuff, Jay, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into soil conservation?
You bet. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you. I am a soil conservation analyst with Gateway Research Organization. I've been around the block a few times with a variety of different positions and projects and stuff, some government, some research oriented, all those sorts of things. But a couple of years ago, Sandeep with Gateway Research Organization put out a call for people interested in doing some soil conservation work and adaptive management of these marginal lands, particularly. That sounded very interesting, so I got on with him, and we've been doing all sorts of interesting stuff for adaptive management of marginal land. And things have taken some twists and turns that weren't expected originally, but nonetheless, it's still a very interesting group of observations that Gateway Research is working on right now.
Right on. So the last time we talked about this project was back in 2020 when it was just getting started. So can you give me just a quick overview, I guess, of the reason you started doing the project for the people who haven't listened to that episode in a while?
Yeah, it's been a while. Probably close to 2 years since we've had a chance to chat. And the original premise of the project was to have a look at perhaps one farm unit and really focus in on having them do adaptive management on the entire farm, doing a complete switch over from rather traditional farming to completely change over the farm and look at perhaps changing less productive areas into pasture or hayland or that sort of a thing. Any water runs, perhaps start working them into riparian areas, that sort of a thing, and minimize any inputs that come from outside of the farm, all those sorts of things. It proved to be a pretty big ask for somebody to drop absolutely everything that they were originally doing and become completely regenerative, if you will, or whatever term you want to use, and completely change things over. So we're looking at doing that and doing some economic returns on it. A couple of things came up as we were working on the project. First of all, to do a true economic analysis on that sort of a project, fairly detailed, a lot of information required. Also, not necessarily the easiest thing to do, given environmental conditions and that sort of a thing. Was it the weather, or was it the changeover in economics that we were looking at? But also, yeah, it was just a huge ask, a huge risk for people to just jump into it with both feet, and probably wasn't the most logical thing for us to ask people. In addition, when we started doing some economic analysis on different qualities of land, we did take some areas that, we looked at the soil types and compared them to the yield monitors on the crops that they were getting off, to compare whether or not the marginal land being farmed similarly to the less marginal land really had that much less of a yield. And it turned out that there was so much more of the management involved in ensuring that class 4, old classes 4 and 5 and beyond produced as much or near as much as the class 2 and 3 that we have so much of in the Westlock area. So looking at that, we thought, well, perhaps we should deal with some of the management issues, try and encourage people to try regenerative projects, and not necessarily expect someone to switch their entire farm over. So those are the sort of learnings that we had from the first year of the project. And so since then, we've been looking at individual projects to minimize greenhouse gases, try and make sure that marginal land was maintaining or perhaps improving its quality, and to continue on with individual projects with a wider group of people instead of just one test farm sort of a thing. So that's what we ended up doing, trying a whole bunch of variety of projects with whether it's compost or different crops, whatever it takes to deal with that, and to see if we can find ways of actually determining the emissions from some of the work that we've been doing. And so we've been working with a variety of people, from the universities to other research associations to individual farmers, to see if we can't come up with some answers on greenhouse gas mitigation, carbon sequestration, and maximizing the improvement in the quality of marginal land.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple of different methods that you've been looking at, and I read through your summary that you sent me, and you've got some really interesting things on that list. So can you talk a little bit about the different sorts of management that you're testing out in these fields?
Yeah, there's some pretty simple projects that we've taken on. We've long since heard, and it's been shown in the labs that anhydrous ammonia, for example, people say, oh, that kills your soil and it kills all the microbiota in the soil. And certainly the replicated research in lab shows that there is a reduction in the quality and quantity of soil biota, whether it's nematodes or fungi or all of this in lab situations in the short term. We said, okay, that's all well and good, that's great, but applying anhydrous ammonia is a very common practice in this neck of the woods. Let's see how that plays out longer term in the field. So we did set up a project to compare fields that had anhydrous ammonia applied on them on a regular basis to a neighboring field that has never had anhydrous on there, and to compare the soil quality, particularly the soil microbiota. And we found that, if anything, in the long term, because the crops are healthier and seem to be doing well, they're producing more nutrients and a better environment for the microbiota to survive. So if any, applying anhydrous to the field improve the quality and quantity of soil microbes that are out there. So that was one small thing to say that, we don't necessarily need to change our farming practices, just making sure that we rotate our crops, occasionally apply anhydrous. Those sorts of things made it very encouraging for people who are trying to do the right thing on their soil and still come up with economic crops. So that was one of the very small things that we looked at. On the perhaps hay and livestock side, we've been looking at bale grazing and seeing if we can find changes in the soil microbiota with bale grazing on an intensive basis. And we found some very interesting things. It's a little early to say a whole lot right now, but as it stands so far, there's been some very interesting changes and improvements to pasture soils as a result of intensive bale grazing over the winter on those fields. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
And not only working with pastures and applying some of the organic, or whatever you'd like to call them, non-traditional fertility additions to soils. We've got our heifer pasture out northeast of here that we've done some cage studies on, where we replicated the addition of different quantities of different nutrients and soil enhancers, whether it's biochar or wood ash or a humate, that sort of a thing. Again, really early days yet on that test, but it looks like a moderate application of some of the soil enhancements is a good thing for the field. Very small replicated results, and like I say, a little early to say for sure yet, but it's very promising that sort of thing is happening. We've taken those nutrients as well, those soil amendments as well, onto cropland. And we put humates and sugar beet lime, the lime that's left over from the process of sugar manufacture, agricultural lime as well, compost, all those sorts of things. And that project is in its second year. The results of the second year with wheat on it this year haven't been analyzed yet, but it's looking quite promising from the first year that some of these soil amendments, soil additions, are both helping the soil as well as the biota and the yield as well. So that's exciting. We've been working with Dr. Derek McKenzie at the University of Alberta on a very large scale, 1 year, but 3-site project. So the replicated data from each of the sites in Westlock, Wetaskiwin, and Camrose are being analyzed to see if adding compost or some blend of compost and fertilizer, or throwing in some of the limes and other soil amendments as well, are helping to improve the short-term and perhaps longer-term yield and quality of the soil. In addition, with that project, we're able to, thank goodness, Derek has been able to procure a sufficient number of gas chambers and greenhouse gas detectors to see what sort of greenhouse gas is emerging from those sorts of applications. They were broadcast applications, and then worked in perhaps a little bit when they were seeded over. And we see some positive results from different combinations of compost and fertilizers or those sorts of things to come up with a common sense way of managing greenhouse gases and maintaining yield without having to add in a tremendous amount of fertilizer. I could go on and on. Those are a few of the interesting things. There's another pasture trial that we're doing on the same heifer pasture, but with the existing trials that we're doing there, we have a couple of rotational grazing situations with a conventionally grazed paddock and then a very intensively grazed mob grazing paddock. And we're looking at the changes to the soil microbes over time with those various types of grazing regimes on them. So that's very interesting to us as well. The rotational grazing seems to be coming out ahead on improvements, or at least highest quality of and quantity of soil microbes. More research and work is being done on that, and we're getting second year's worth of results there. We'll see how those turn out. So lots and lots of fun stuff, good stuff. Hopefully, while our project took a bit of a left turn from the initial premise, we're getting a lot of good results from what people can do in a very practical sense to minimize greenhouse gases and improve the quality of marginal soils.
Right on. Lots of different stuff going on, but that's really cool.
Those are just the tip of the iceberg. We've got all sorts of stuff with different crops in annual cropping field. Lots of good information coming out of this whole project. Yeah. So we're quite excited with that.
Yeah, I bet. Do you have any what you would qualify as like standout successes so far, or is it too early to tell?
We're a cautious bunch here at Grow. We love to say that we've got answers for all sorts of things. We were quite excited with our intercropping trial where we put legumes with broadleaf crops. The first year we had a bit of a wreck with soil selection being kind of tough and a very, very dry year. So that kind of kiboshed the results off of that. So we changed it up a little bit, ensuring that we got a little innovative with some of the pulses that we've tried in the project. And we had some incredible growth this year. We had some adequate moisture, at least early in the season. And the combinations, we were hoping to go with 60% of a seeding rate of a pulse compared to 60% of a seeding rate with a broadleaf crop, and see if we can end up with something known as over yielding, where 60% plus 60% does equal 120%. So you end up with 120% of a crop. didn't exactly turn out that way, but we had some pretty awesome yields, and the net economic returns were pretty outstanding as well, partially due to the fact that there were some crops such as the mustards this year that were in short supply elsewhere, and so the price of mustards turned out quite nicely. So the gross return was over $2,000 an acre. If we could do that on all of our acres, that would be very exciting. On the replicated plots of the yellow mustard, particularly, we were quite amazed, quite pleased with the results that we were getting, and with the potential for longer, hotter, drier years, perhaps in the future. A dry season crop like mustard, longer season than the average of what we've got here, might be quite appealing to people. So some of our crops that we had in there, whether it was the mustards or flax, which people are usually saying that's the last crop to come off in any given year in the Westlock area, all of them did quite well. The jury is still out, though. We're still trying to do some more analysis to see if there actually was the over yielding thing wasn't quite what we thought it would be this year. But the other reason that you do intercropping with legumes or with pulse crops is to see if you can have some nitrogen leakage. The pulse crops are all nitrogen fixers, and we're hopeful to see that, or hopeful for the possibility of them leaking some nutrients into some of the non-legume, non-pulse crops. The yields turned out quite nice, and there was, with a minimum amount of nitrogen, 15 pounds an acre is all that we applied, but we did have it on a pulse pulse crop in 2021. So we're trying to ferret out whether there was some leakage of the nitrogen from the crops in the current year versus whether it was strictly the nitrogen from the built up amount from the nodulation from the previous year that did the work. But regardless, that was a very interesting thing for us. The mustards did extremely well. We tried some new crops for the area called lupins, the blue lupins, which are supposed to reliably mature in the season that we've got here. Did quite well, but because it was a long, dry, hot summer, the white lupins, which people tell us aren't supposed to reliably mature in this neck of the woods, actually did extremely well. They yielded a tremendous amount. Both types of lupins, the white and the blue, stood up very straight. So one of the kicks that we often hear about legume crops is that they lay so flat you can't pick them up, and we did see that in the lentils that we put in. But the lupins stood extremely well. The only downside of the blue lupins that we saw was that they have very fragile pods, and about 72 hours between maturity and when shelling starts. So we lost, we estimate about 7 bushels an acre due to shelling. But given the current prices that we found, we were still looking at $800 or $900 an acre gross returns off of those fields those plots anyway. And we realized that small plots sometimes have a high yield on their own. But we certainly see that some of these innovative crops, especially in the face of hotter, drier years, would be definitely worth a risk mitigation type of a plot or a field to have producers take a chance on and hopefully do at least as well as some of the other crops. And so we had fun with those sorts of things, and yeah, everybody was quite impressed with the yields that we saw off of those. So those work well on marginal fields as well because they provide their own N. The land that we were on is a class 4, and yeah, we were getting between $4,000 and $2,000 gross an acre off of them. So we were pretty pleased that we can see some ways to improve the soil as well as provide a decent return for producers with some of these newer crops that we're taking the risk on, so producers, at least have their risks mitigated a little bit there.
Absolutely. Oh, and real quick, could you just define some of the classes of soil? It's been a while since I took that class in college.
As it has been for a lot of us. The soil classes range from a class 1 to a class 7. The class 1 being the ideal soil, probably 2 feet deep of blacktop soil, all the way down to a class 7, which is generally regarded as not conducive to traditional agriculture. And then there's used to be a class O as well for organic soils, which were generally peat moss or those sorts of things that have particular issues, particular problems with drying out very rapidly, and not always the best in the nutrient category. That was the traditional CLI, Canada Land Inventory rating. When they switched over to the LSRS, the Land Suitability Rating System, they took the soil capabilities, soil qualities, and threw in some of the environmental and topography pieces with those as well, so that nowadays we can look at the LSRS system, a little bit broader of a system that they identify, but it takes the whole broad picture into it, whether there's certain areas that are hilly or stony, or whether they tend to be in an area that freezes quite easily compared to others. They take both the environment and the soil positioning as well into consideration with the LSRS system. It's still gone from a 1 to a 7, with the 7, the classes 4, 5, 6, and 7 being land that we're particularly interested in, areas that are generally not considered ideal for annual cropping.
Right, that makes sense. The other one I wanted to talk about, since you've mentioned it a little bit, we had a very, very dry year last year, and then this year we had a lot of moisture, and then no moisture, and then too hot, and then some people got good moisture at the end of the year and some people didn't. So have you noticed any interesting things with the different management things you've tried over the fluctuating rainfall and that sort of stuff?
Right. We're looking at some of the composts and humates and biochars and those sorts of things as a soil moisture protectant as well. Whether we can hope that and expect that they protect the moisture and help it to not be evaporated quite so quickly, and certainly with some of the higher organic matter additions that we put in, that seems to be the case, that they are able to hold their moisture in a little bit better than some of the traditional more mineralized soils, and we're looking forward to continuing our research on that to see that they are providing additional benefits than just the nutrients themselves to help the crops finish off. And they sure seem to be doing that, whether it's the, like I say, the humates, the biochars, the compost that we've been adding, they seem to provide additional benefits than just the nutrients themselves and the organic matter themselves. So with these years, yeah, it's good. And also seeing that, some crops can handle dry conditions towards the fall. In fact, it helps them to mature and ripen on a timely basis. The lupins, being from Australia or being grown extensively in Australia, they're a crop that seems to be able to manage their way through dry conditions, particularly late in the season, a whole lot better than some of the others. We were surprised with how well some of our hemp work turned out, some of our varieties. We just had a few. We tried one that's traditionally considered a seed variety, compared to one that's considered perhaps more of a dual purpose variety. Didn't matter actually this year as to what type we were looking at. They both did really quite well. But also, if you're looking for a dual purpose variety, some of the dual purposes, one of the dual purposes anyway that we tried, worked quite well and produced an economic yield on the seed alone. We didn't do a whole lot of additional work on the second yield, if you will, where the fiber off of that, but certainly there was a sufficient amount growth. They were over 6-7 feet tall, manageable, but not so tall that they were awkward to harvest as a second harvest in the fiber side of things. So very encouraging in that regard as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, kind of fun.
Oh, right. So the other one I wanted to talk about a little bit was the economic side of thing, because that's the big thing with marginal land, is that it's expensive to run sometimes.
For sure. So we're looking at some of our projects with regards to adding nitrogen downstream if the year looks like it's going to be good, particularly on these marginal soils. So we tried two approaches there. There's a foliar nitrogen that you can add if conditions look good and you think you're going to be able to improve the yield and the protein in certain crops. So we did that and looked okay with some of the added foliar nitrogen that we put on. We didn't have a negative impact on the yield, and the quality was, if anything, better. So those were good. The other aspect that I'm sure producers are hearing a lot about is with regards to foliar nitrogen fixing bacteria applied to the crops down the road. And we did exactly that with one particular bacteria. And the positive result from that we were hoping for and expected was that if we reduce the nitrogen addition by 15% and then threw on the nitrogen fixing bacteria, that if the yield stayed the same, that's an economic win for us. That would be a way of using less fossil fuels, less nitrogen production, less fertilizer production, and still maintaining the yield and the nitrogen in the soil. We're still waiting for some of the final pieces to that puzzle, whether we actually maintain the nitrogen in the soil the same as if you just added fertilizer, but the yields did not suffer when we used 50% less nitrogen fertilizer and put in some of these nitrogen fixing bacteria. So that's helping out on the economic piece. We have observed producers who, with their yield monitors, have started right from square one. They know where their poor soils are, and they might reduce the N added to those sorts of fields, and then doing economic returns on them with their yield monitors in the end, and finding out that producers are they've been doing it all along, really, but it's intuitive that with the reduction in N with a variable rate fertilizer application and the reduced expectations, the managed expectations of yield on these class 4, 5, 6, and 7 soils, they are still able to maintain an adequate return without wasting too much nitrogen on these fields that just aren't going to produce as much as the class 1, 2, 3s. So those sorts of things have been very cool. It's a good learning on that, and we're continuing to learn on those sorts of things.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, I think that's, the only other one was you have mentioned soil health and soil quality improvement and that sort of stuff. So can you tell me a little bit about how you're measuring that stuff?
You bet. There's some good labs out there that are able to tell us what is happening with the soil microbes. They're very important for growth and production on all kinds of fields. So we send the soil samples away to the various labs, whether it's a CARE, a soil health lab, or others that are out there, and have them have a good hard look at the nutrients and the microbes that are in the soil to see what changes are happening over time. So whether it's the fungi that'll help to break down the organic matter in the fields, or bacteria that help to build up the soil, or actinomycetes that help with the breakdown process as well. All of those are looked at through a variety of labs that we go to, and they tell us whether the soil is healthy or less healthy by the quantity and quality of the good bugs, if you will, versus the bad bugs that are in a soil. And we've been very happy, and we've had quite some learnings going on how these various bacteria and fungi and whatnot change over time with various crops and various management strategies, whether it's intercropping or relay cropping or trying to keep living roots in the soil for as long as possible in the year with some late fall seeding of a winter crop, then breaking that up and going into another annual crop. Lots of different ideas that are coming to mind to help maintain the quality of the microbes in the soil.
Right on.
So the project it was initially a 3-year project. We may, because of all the good learnings that we're finding and the variety of innovative things that we're finding through the work, this may carry on for some time longer. There's never a shortage of things to learn as time goes on with the soil. It's a fascinating area, and we have some ability to carry on these sorts of results, and hopefully they will apply to a good portion of the province, or perhaps not all of them, not the whole province, but a good portion of the area, and even those areas that are not quite as similar to ours as we might be able to directly apply these principles to. They might be able to take some learnings from them as well themselves and adapt what we're learning, what we're doing here to soils that are not quite the same as ours.
For sure. That's awesome. So for people who are listening and are very excited about all of this information, where can people go to find more information about this project or just grow generally and the work that you guys are doing?
You betcha. We do have a Facebook page that they can go to. We have a website that people can go on, and there's always the old-fashioned telephone that people can give us a shout, and we can discuss more of our information with that. We do put out an annual report as well, much of which is going to be put on the website this year, with a lot of the background on this report and some of the ideas of what we're going to be doing going forward. So lots of opportunity there to catch up on perhaps more of the details of what we're doing. And hopefully, who knows, they might come up with some ideas that we haven't thought of yet. And we'd love to hear from folks that might have more ideas as well.
Right on. That's awesome. Is there anything we've missed or anything that you'd like to mention before we sign off?
Gosh, I don't think so. I think we've covered the waterfront there. It's been an interesting opportunity to talk to you, and I sure appreciate being able to talk about our research.
Yeah, so it was very interesting to hear what you've been up to. Peace Country Beef and Forage Association is a research and extension group based out of Fairview, Alberta. Our mission is to help producers thrive in an agricultural system that is profitable, regenerative, and attractive to future generations. To learn more about what we do and see the results of our research trials or our archive of newsletters and fact sheets, check out our website at peacecountrybeef.ca. Want to get in touch? Have a burning question or a topic suggestion? Send us a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Thanks for listening.